A mom in the metro whose daughter was murdered has found a new way to keep her name alive. Our Bella Caracta tells us how you can be a part of the conversation her mom hopes leads to change.
Carly Rain Wood was murdered November of 2022. The suspect, a four-time convicted felony offender. The point of the Carly Rain Matters podcast is to not only remember her name, but to talk about the issues and policy so this tragedy doesn't continue to happen.
Carly Rain Matters. Topics that arise in a journey through murder, grief, loss, and fight for change.
Amber Wood is Carly's mom. Since her daughter's murder, she's been outspoken for criminal justice reform, and her latest platform for change is podcasting.
The podcast kind of was born through my own kind of grief journey and healing and an outlet.
8 episodes are published with more to come, but right now Wood says they're raw, organic, and barely edited.
Just kind of hit record and go from there.
What started as a venue to heal quickly transformed to something much more complex. Their goal is to put emphasis on advocating for policy change through informed voting.
It's all things that kind of fit into this spider web of rabbit holes that all connect.
Her podcast features a variety of perspectives to talk about this greater problem, including interviews from the Douglas County Sheriff, Omaha Police Officer Association, victims and their families, and here, a convicted felon.
He's supposed to be at homecoming that night, couldn't afford homecoming, and ended up on the block with some guys that I shouldn't have been on the block with.
I feel like I'm helping them to tell a story that they maybe thought nobody wanted to hear.
She turns vulnerable conversations and zooms them out to policy ones.
Had that judge not given pretrial release, or had there been a better system of pretrial release, it puts some sort of guardrails in place, right?
One of her most recent guests from a soon-to-be-dropped episode is Lisa Robles, a Metro woman whose nephew was murdered in Philadelphia.
You know, I've had to watch my sister's life fall apart. I've watched my nieces and nephew struggle with this. I've watched my sister's marriage struggle.
Despite a hurtful topic for the two, they both find comfort and purpose in pushing the conversation forward. On your side, in Omaha, Bella Caracta, 6 News.
You can find the Carly, spelled with a K, Rain Matters podcast on popular streaming platforms or head to our website at WOWT.com where we'll have a link to it.